They say you can't choose your family, but you can't choose your neighbors either. Sometimes that can be even scarier. Tonight, I'm sharing 3 true stories submitted by viewers like you about the neighbors they wish they'd never met. Let's get into it. Our first story comes from a user named Clara. She had just moved into a charming little duplex, excited for the quiet life. Her next-door neighbor, an elderly man named Mr. Abernathy, seemed sweet at first. He'd wave whenever he saw her and often left baked goods on her doorstep. But soon, the gestures turned. Strange. He started leaving her single, dead roses. Then, one night, Clara was woken up by a faint, scratching sound. She peeked through her blinds and saw Mr. Abernathy standing in her yard, just staring at her window. He wasn't moving, just standing there, with a chillingly wide smile on his face. This went on for weeks. The scratching, the staring. The police said they couldn't do anything since he wasn't technically on her property. One day, the gifts stopped. The staring stopped. Clara was relieved, thinking he'd finally given up. A week later, a for sale sign went up in his yard. The realtor told Clara that Mr. Abernathy had passed away in his sleep. While packing his things, his family found dozens of notebooks. They were filled, cover to cover, with every detail of Clara's daily routine, along with crudely drawn pictures of her sleeping. The last entry simply said, "Soon she won't be alone." Clara moved out the next day. Next, we have a story from Mark, who lived in a busy apartment complex. His downstairs neighbor, a guy he only knew as John, was a musician. Or at least, that's what Mark assumed from the constant thumping bass he heard at all hours. He complained to management several times, but nothing changed. One evening, Mark had finally had enough. He marched downstairs and pounded on John's door. There was no answer, but the door creaked open slightly. Mark, fueled by frustration, pushed it open and called out. The apartment was dark and smelled awful. As his eyes adjusted, he saw that the walls were covered, floor to ceiling, with egg cartons. The source of the thumping wasn't a speaker. It was a single, large drum in the middle of the room, with a bizarre-looking mechanism rigged to continuously beat it. But the most terrifying part was what was sitting in a chair facing the drum. A life-sized, incredibly realistic mannequin dressed in John's clothes. Mark backed out, horrified, and called the police. They later found out the real John had moved out months ago without telling anyone. No one knew who had been coming and going from that apartment, or why they had set up that creepy, endless drum solo for an audience of one. Our final story tonight is from a woman named Sarah. She lived in a suburban neighborhood with her husband and 2 young kids. Their next-door neighbor was a single woman who mostly kept to herself. One afternoon, Sarah's kids were playing in the backyard when their ball went over the fence. Sarah went over to ask for it back. The neighbor opened the door, smiled, and said she'd get it. But as she turned, Sarah saw something through the open door. The entire living room was set up like a child's bedroom, but it was all old and faded. There was a small bed, a rocking horse, and shelves full of dusty toys. It looked like a time capsule from decades ago. The neighbor returned with the ball and quickly closed the door. Later that week, Sarah was talking to an older resident on the street who mentioned the neighbor had a daughter who had vanished from the backyard over 30 years ago. She was never found. The neighbor had kept her room exactly as it was, waiting for her to come home. Sarah says she can't look at that house the same way again, knowing a mother's grief is just a wall away, frozen in time. Sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones living right next door, hidden behind a friendly wave or a closed curtain. Thanks for watching. If you have a story you'd like to share, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more true scary stories. Stay safe out there. Have you ever had that one neighbor who just gave you the creeps? I'm not talking about the guy who mows his lawn at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. I'm talking about something far more unsettling. Let me tell you about my old neighbor, Mr. Harrison. I moved into my first apartment when I was 22. It was a small, cozy place on the second floor of a quiet building. Mr. Harrison lived in the unit directly across the hall. He was an elderly man, probably in his late 70s, and always kept to himself. At first, I thought he was just a bit lonely. I'd say hello in the hallway, and he'd just nod, never making eye contact. His eyes were what first unnerved me. They were pale blue and seemed to look right through you. A few weeks after I moved in, strange things started happening. I'd come home from work to find my doormat slightly askew, as if someone had lifted it and put it back down carelessly. Then, small, insignificant items started to go missing from my apartment. A spare key I kept in a little dish by the door, a book I was reading, even a single sock from my laundry basket. I chalked it up to my own forgetfulness. I was young, busy, and always a bit scattered, but the feeling of being watched intensified. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear a faint scratching sound at my door. When I'd look through the peephole, the hallway would be empty. Yet, the sound would stop the instant my eye met the lens. I started triple-checking my locks before bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt like I was losing my mind, becoming paranoid in my own home. The real turning point came one evening. I was cooking dinner, listening to music, when I dropped a spoon. It rolled under the gap of my front door and into the hallway. I sighed, opened the door, and bent down to pick it up. As I did, I noticed something odd about Mr. Harrison's door across the hall. At the very bottom, near the floor, was a tiny, almost invisible hole that had been drilled through the wood. It was aimed directly at my front door. My blood ran cold. The angle was perfect. Anyone looking through that hole would have a clear, albeit narrow, view straight into my living room. All the strange occurrences suddenly clicked into place. The missing key, the feeling of being watched, the scratching sounds. It wasn't my imagination. Mr. Harrison had been observing me. I immediately called my landlord and the police. When the police went to speak with Mr. Harrison, he refused to open his door. They eventually had to get a warrant. What they found inside his apartment was 1,000 times worse than I could have ever imagined. The walls of his living room were covered, floor to ceiling, with photographs of me. Pictures of me coming and going. Pictures of me through my living room window. And even pictures that seemed to have been taken from inside my own apartment. In a dusty corner, they found a small collection of my missing things, arranged like trophies on a shelf. The book, the single sock, and a dozen other little items I hadn't even noticed were gone. The police determined he had used my spare key to enter my apartment while I was at work, setting up hidden cameras and taking my things. The scratching sound was him at my door, probably trying to listen or look through the keyhole. I moved out the very next day. I couldn't spend another night in that building. To this day, the thought of his pale blue eyes and that tiny hole in the door sends a shiver down my spine. It's a chilling reminder that you never truly know who is living right across the hall. So, always trust your gut instinct. If something feels off, it probably is. Stay safe out there. Moving into my first solo apartment felt like a dream. It was a cozy little one-bedroom on the top floor of an old but charming building. For the first few weeks, everything was perfect. I loved the quiet, the independence, the feeling of having a space that was entirely my own. But then, I started noticing things. Small things, at first. My keys not being exactly where I left them. The thermostat turned down a degree or two. I brushed it off as my own forgetfulness, the stress of a new job, settling into a new routine. Then came the noises. Faint scratching sounds from the ceiling late at night. I told myself it was just mice, a common problem in older buildings. I'd call the landlord in the morning, but the sounds grew bolder, more distinct. It wasn't scratching. It sounded like footsteps, a slow, deliberate shuffle right above my bedroom. This was impossible. I was on the top floor. There was only an attic space above me, and the landlord had assured me it was sealed and used only for storage. One night, the shuffling was so loud it woke me from a dead sleep. My heart pounded against my ribs. I lay there, frozen, listening. A floorboard creaked directly over my bed, then another. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling as I turned on the flashlight and aimed it at the ceiling. Nothing, just plain white plaster. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was the building settling or pipes expanding. But the feeling of being watched was so intense, so suffocating, I couldn't shake it. The next day, I noticed the spare key I kept in a kitchen drawer was gone. Panic started to set in. Was I losing my mind? Was I being paranoid? I called my landlord and told him about the noises. He was dismissive, saying it was probably raccoons on the roof and he'd send someone to check it out eventually. He brushed off my concern about the attic, repeating that no one ever goes up there. But his tone felt a little too rushed, a little too eager to get off the phone. That weekend, I decided I couldn't live like this. The lack of sleep and constant anxiety were taking a toll. I was packing a bag to stay at a friend's place when I heard it again, a soft thud from the living room. But this time, I was wide awake, and it was broad daylight. I crept out of my bedroom, my phone clutched in my hand, ready to call for help. My eyes scanned the room. Everything seemed normal until I looked at the small vent near the floor. The grate, which was always screwed tightly shut, was slightly ajar. My blood ran cold. I knelt down, my hands trembling, and peered into the darkness of the vent. Something glinted back at me. It was a pair of glasses. Not just any glasses. They were the thick, black-framed ones that belonged to my downstairs neighbor. An elderly man I'd only ever exchanged brief hellos with in the hallway. He always seemed so quiet, so harmless. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. The missing key, the small changes in my apartment, the sounds from the attic. I scrambled backwards away from the vent and ran out of my apartment without even grabbing my bag. I called the police from the safety of my car. When they arrived and investigated, the truth was far more terrifying than I could have imagined. My quiet, elderly neighbor had managed to create a crawlspace between the floors, connecting his apartment to mine through the ventilation system and the walls. He had been secretly entering my apartment for weeks, moving things, watching me. The attic noises were him, crawling in the space directly above my bed. The police found a small collection of my things in his home, a hairbrush, a missing sock, and the spare key from my kitchen. I moved out the very next day and never looked back. It just goes to show, you never truly know who you're living next to. Thanks for listening, and remember to always trust your gut. Stay safe out there.